Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first Open Mind program of the 2026 season. For those of you with us for the first time, the Open Mind brings together leading voices at the crossroads of science and culture to explore meaningful and timely issues of mental health. The Open Mind is proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of both boards, we cannot think of a more meaningful way to open our 2026 Open Mind season than presenting a program on hope, something we could all use a little more of these days. And so we are thrilled to welcome Kathryn Goetzke, Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company and author of The Biggest Little Book About Hope, who is joining us from her home in Naples, Florida. We are also thrilled to welcome back to the Open Mind Dr. Elizabeth Bromley, Professor of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. More about both of these preeminent scholars in just a moment. Hopelessness is a powerful predictor of adverse mental health outcomes, including suicide, self-harm, addiction, and violence. At a time when hopelessness is reaching unprecedented levels, The Biggest Little Book About Hope offers us practical, research-informed skills to help individuals intentionally integrate hope into their daily lives. In this program, Kathryn will guide us on a journey of personal growth and discovery toward a more hope-filled future. She will share her own lived experiences, including the loss of her father to suicide, and her own recovery journey that has shaped her mission to ensure that people understand hopelessness and are equipped with proactive tools to manage it. Drawing from her work as Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, she will also highlight global initiatives she has launched, including Hopeful Mind, Hopeful Cities, and Hopeful Mindsets. Now, in addition to being the Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, Kathryn is also the host of the Hope Matrix podcast. She serves as a representative to the United Nations for the World Federation for Mental Health and was instrumental in the establishment of the International Day of Hope, now observed globally on July 12th. Her work has been featured in Entrepreneur, BBC, CBS, PBS, Psychology Today, InStyle, and Scholastic, among others. And her research on hope has been published in peer-reviewed articles worldwide. Dr. Elizabeth Bromley, who goes by Beth, is professor in residence in the departments of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences and anthropology at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine, and she is the director of the Center for Health Services and Society at the Semel Institute. Her research focuses on public mental health systems, implementation science, and provider well-being. Dr. Bromley leads statewide initiatives to advance person-centered care for individuals with severe mental illness and has served veterans at the Greater Los Angeles VA for over 2 decades. We want to extend our gratitude to both of our experts for taking the time to be with us today to share their knowledge and expertise with us. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. Today's program will run for 1 hour with the last segment reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask a question of either speaker, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. With more than 1,200 people registered, we may not get to every question, but we will do our very best. Today's program is being recorded. You can see it starting tomorrow on our website, friendsofsemelinstitute.org. There you'll also find a calendar of upcoming events, videos from past programs, information about the Open Mind Film Festival for high school students, now in its 6th year, our Teen Advisory Council, and their 3rd annual Gen Z Wellness Summit in March. We do a lot here. We also have a Friends Scholar research program and endowed term chairs, which are especially vital right now in this era of reduced federal research funding. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kathryn Goetzke and Dr. Elizabeth Bromley. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's so
Thank
wonderful
you,
to be
Vicki.
here.
Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to this
Oh,
conversation. Thanks for
thank
taking the
you
time.
too, Beth. Yes, me too. Absolutely.
It's a really, as Vicki's saying, a perfect way to start off the new year. I think really to dive deep and make sure we have a grounding and a sense of practice for hope. I hope, Kathryn, I wonder if you could just start us off by telling us a bit about why you wrote the book, and maybe a bit about what the experience was like of writing this book.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I mean, I really wrote the book out of frustration. So, I have been doing my work on hope for over 15 years. I've been in global mental health over 20 years. And I wasn't having the reach that I wanted. And when we look at the global mental health work, I've been, again, pretty engaged attending the World Health Organization. It has an MHGAP forum every year. They have leaders from all over the world, researchers, talking about mental health. And, globally, we spend about 5%, countries spend about 5% of their health budgets on mental health. So it's already prioritized very low. And then of that budget, maybe over 60% of that goes to crisis resources. And, I see that, I mean, we're very reactive as a society, kind of overall. And I found that experience to be true in my work around hope. It was very hard to get funding for it. I seed funded it through my other company, The Mood Factory, and then I became literally obsessed because I've been told I'm at high risk of suicide. So, doctors have told me that I have all really of the risk factors. And yet I was going to conferences and they were talking about restricting access to means. So they did seminars on, how do you safely lock up your medications, your guns, pesticides for farmers, all of these things, which are very important methods. And they're also talking about 800 numbers. Again, super helpful in time of crisis for many people. We know that that can be very effective. And yet I knew that wasn't going to be effective for me. As they mentioned, I lost my father to suicide. I know he never would have used those. I know that wouldn't have saved him. And so when I kind of came to that realization, I thought, if you want to really prevent suicide, you have to understand the root cause. That's really basic science. And I wasn't hearing any of that talk. And so I started doing a lot of deep literature reviews. I don't have a PhD, I have an MBA, but I'm very research driven and oriented, and I've been trained doing consumer product research and market research. So I went on this exploration, and study after study after study, hopelessness came up again as that single consistent predictor of suicide. Not depression, not anxiety, but hopelessness. And so I set out then to understand what hopelessness is. I can get more into that. We all experience moments actually all the time. A lot of them are just so unconscious, and started studying that. I thought, well, why? They were measuring hope. There were hope scientists, but they weren't teaching you how to become more hopeful. So I wanted to understand that deeply. And I was actually then able to prove through research we did around the world that you could teach hope as a skill. And we're able to show and publish studies that as we increased hope, symptoms of anxiety and depression decreased. And I thought, wow, why aren't we doing this everywhere? This is prevention. Hope is a protective factor for anxiety and depression. If we can get hope scores up, we can prevent anxiety and depression from occurring. And again, I just couldn't get the funding to support the work, and I wanted to get my message out. And so to me, I thought writing a book would be a good way to just express myself, and it's a stress skill that I use. instead of using anger as I did in the past through addictive kind of practices, I write, I journal. And so my book was, that process for me. And it was very cathartic. I don't love going back into my own suicide attempt, but I thought that that was an important context to share on kind of what happened.
Well, the book is very personal, Kathryn. I think it is a gift in that way that you share so much in the book of your experience and your family. And I felt, in fact, it was a whole practice. You say that fairly explicitly in the book, that writing it started in the way you described as a part of what you do to build hope for yourself. And yet you recognized it may be meaningful for others. And I wonder, is there more you could say about the reception and what it's like for you as you talk about the book with others, what you're hearing so far about what it does offer to your audiences? How has that process been in your experience?
Yeah, it's been really wonderful. I get great feedback on it. It gives people an opportunity to kind of share their own stories and experiences. A big part of my work in mental health initially is about rebranding depression. Now it's really understanding hope, but to me, stigma is really the brand around depression and mental health overall. And the imagery was so negative, people wouldn't talk about it. Again, this was, over 20 years ago that I started this work. So, writing about it in such, a vulnerable way, in a way that I thought other people could relate to me. I mean, I was not actively in a depressed state. It was a moment of hopeless, a very big moment. It flooded my emotions. It took me 10 years to probably tell anyone about the experience of attempting to take my life. And that was really shocking to me. I didn't think I would ever attempt that because of the impact I felt from my father and what happened. And I realized at that point that it's not anything you do to anyone else. And, no one's really immune. When you look at hopelessness, you understand we all experience moments of hopelessness. So it was important for me to get that message out and to teach as many people everything I knew to the best of my ability, because it was harder to get the other work going. I'm really committed to my global work around ensuring all know what hopelessness is and how to get to hope. So I'm not that focused on the book, but for me, the book was about getting it out to people that might resonate with it or need it.
Right. Thank you for doing that. It really is a very generous offering. I'd love actually if you could talk a bit about how you define hope, and as you do practical work, what's the definition of hope that you work with? The book defines hope as about having a positive expectation for the future and the ability to get there in a way that feels good. So hope is both a positive feeling and inspired action. Both sort of a feeling and a process of doing. Maybe you can tell us a little more about how you define hope, what you think it is, what it isn't, what the boundaries are of hope, what kinds of experiences are especially consistent with your concept of hope.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love this. And my definition continues to evolve and my work evolves. I mean, I've made so much progress since I even wrote that book. So I'm ready for two more actually that I'm working on right now. But hope is basically the belief that the future can be better than today. So, of course, it's a great topic as we go into the new year. Can the new year be better than our last? And do we or I have the power to make it so? So, that's really the kind of primary definition of hope. Now, hope scientists generally use Snyder's theory of hope. And I read a lot about Snyder, and we use his scales in our work to research kind of effectiveness of our programming. But he talks about goals. You have a goal in the future, you have agency, so you feel powerful to do it, and then you can create pathways to those goals. And I, really came at hope from hopelessness because I wanted to solve for hopelessness. I wanted to understand what hopelessness is, and I wanted to, from there, figure out how you get to hope. Because, there are many reasons. We have micro moments, like even an email from a boss or someone, or getting cut off in traffic. Because when you look at hopelessness, it's despair. So it's emotional despair and it's motivational helplessness. And it's when those two kind of collide. So again, when you think about hope, the future can be better than today, and I have the power to make it so. Hopelessness is really everything is horrible and I can't do anything about it. And so, really, for me, it was about how do we get out of our despair into feeling better, and how do we get out of helplessness into action? Two really important ingredients for hope. I kind of created the hope matrix that really show, that helplessness and getting into action, and then our emotional despair and how we get to positive feelings. So, that's really where it was all born from. And so I've developed the kind of framework around hope. My work is a little bit different from traditional hope scientists because I think it's, the despair, the knowing how to manage our emotional despair in healthy ways is critical to hope. And it's, my dad didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I've been in recovery over 21 years. It was basically because I was managing my despair in super unhealthy ways, and we see that with violence, self-harm, all of these things. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. And the awesome thing about it is you can actually learn how to hope. And we do work with inner city kids, and we just did a program in the incarcerated youth. And the first lesson was a bit on hope. The second was hopelessness. And they were like involved as soon as we talked about hopelessness because they so identified with this. And once they learned that they could actually learn how to hope, that they didn't have to be committed to that hopelessness, of course, like knowing what they grew up in and their situations and the environment, of course, it makes sense that they're there, but they actually had power and learned how they could use that power. So it's transformative overall to just know that you can grow your hope and learn how to hope.
Well, I feel the book really nicely lays out a set of what you call hopeful state practices. And you can tell these are experimentations. These are things you developed, devised, that work for many, many people. And there may be more, and others and individuals can come up with their own hopeful state practices. We've mentioned a couple: writing, but meditation, radical acceptance. Maybe tell us a little more about your hopeful state practices, and how you teach them, how you see that people can adopt them, what makes them so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's even just powerful knowing that we can do things to build our hope, that we're not, no matter what we're in. And, this is, especially if you grew up in challenging environments, it's like finding where your power is and how you can take action is so important. And the frame we like built on that framework since then. So shine is actually now the mnemonic for the skills we use to teach hope. I'll just go through them. So stress skills, so how we identify and manage our stress response. We have happiness habits, so how we cultivate happy hormones in healthy ways versus unhealthy ways. Inspired action, so kind of how we set goals, overcome obstacles to goals, re-goal, evidence-based frameworks around that. We do nourishing networks, so how you cultivate healthy bi-directional networks, and then eliminating challenges. And these are all these kind of thinking patterns or negative thought patterns that get in the way of our ability to get to hope. So it's evolved a bit into this framework, and this framework is now embedded into all of our programming. For me specifically, stress skills, the number one thing is the 90-second pause. Jill Bolt Taylor wrote a book, My Stroke of Insight, that I just love. And, we have this 90-second stress response when we're triggered by things external to us. So even something like an email, of course, bigger things, bigger trigger, bigger reactions. and learning that it has a physiological effect on our body and our brain, and we can't get to our frontal lobe when we're in that stress response. We're in our downstairs brain, so in that fight, flight, or freeze or fawn. I see that you all have a program coming up on fawning, so which is a lot of people ask what that is. But we go into that state, but learning how to breathe through, notice when our body starts reacting, when my body starts reacting, and how to breathe through that so that I don't have to turn to addictions and things has been really critical. I think this is key to hope because, if we're reacting in these state, we make choices that are really unhealthy for us, that soothe us in the moment, but aren't healthy for us longer term. And so learning how to navigate that stress response for me has been critical. The other thing about the inspired actions that I love is, we often think that we will get motivated in our minds first, like we'll all of a sudden be motivated and then we'll take action. When it's actually, you have to take a step first. You have to start doing the thing, and then that feedback loop, you get rewards, you get chemical rewards from actually doing things. And then that starts to kind of build. So that's how you build that motivation loop. And we often think about it the other way. So, doing one thing, taking one step, even if it's really hard, has been critical for me and for my ability to kind of get that going, get that motivation loop going.
At the same time, I can see that what's so nice about that shine framework, for some, the H of the happiness states, really understanding what are the cues and the context and the activities that bring on positive emotion and happiness. That might be for some really a key place to focus, and it might bring out questions. Do I really deserve that? Is that worth spending time on? And so for individuals that might be struggling with hopelessness for that reason, really focusing on that activity could be very powerful. So it's a great framework in that way. And I imagine eliminating challenges may have particular resonance where there are, I mean, I'd love to hear you say more about it, but I'm imagining it can be addictive behaviors or substance use or contextual factors that we might, once we start to notice, we think, well, if I could actually make some of these practices easier for me to do, really scaffold them in my everyday life. Just some additional thoughts. Maybe you want to say more about how these skills can be applied and where they're differentially important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you brought up such great points. I mean, first are the happiness habits. We stop doing the things that are healthy for us when we're under extreme stress. And that's when our stress hormones get really high. And that's when we actually need our happy hormones. Like we need them to counteract the stress hormones. And so getting outside into nature, going to try to do some kind of exercise when possible, limiting our unhealthy behaviors. I was, I just turned to addictive, whether it was eating, I smoked in my youth or drinking or, all of these unhealthy because I was getting hits of dopamine. You actually get hits of dopamine and those happy hormones from doing these things, but they're so unhealthy for us. So our body's craving us. We're doing what we kind of know, but we don't understand we can get them in other ways and healthier ways. So, I had to replace running, smoking, and I had to go to running, and that, generated that. But you have to learn how to, replace the unhealthy ones with the healthy ones. And with youth as well, it's so sad to me that they're not taught these skills because when you're violent and when you're aggressive and when you're a bully and you actually get a reaction from someone, those all spike your dopamine, your serotonin. So these kids are trying to feel better in the best way that they know how. And they don't understand the physiological part of it and how the other happiness habits can better serve them and what they want in their future. So it's super important. And yeah, the eliminating challenges is kind of a big category. And the kids also said, oh my God, I add that, I do that, I do that, and I do that. And that's the thing. We all, we ruminate. Internalizing failure is a big one, especially with our youth. Like something bad happens and they think I'm bad, they internalize that. We teach them how to kind of deconstruct the failures from the sense of self. Rumination, worry, internalizing failure. I can worry myself into a panic attack if I don't address my worry. I can ruminate myself into a depressive episode, which I have done without awareness. And so to me, it's about just learning, like becoming curious about what all these things are that our brain kind of does automatically, automatic negative thoughts, where our brain just kind of cycles in those negative ways. And then, all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking. So it's really just about learning what these things are that our brain can do to kind of sabotage us, and how to negate them and build healthier practices to kind of intercept those things.
Mm, very powerful. Do you want to say a little about when you should start teaching this? How young are the kids you've worked with, and how do you begin, and how does it
I
evolve?
know. Well, we don't have our like 2 to 5 program yet, 2 to 6, and we need that. So that's something we're working on, because that's really the age. I started initially with 7 to 11-year-olds because of the jump in depressive, anxious symptoms at that age. And, my goal is to get it mandated in education so that everyone learns, and then to have teachers educated on, like, here are some things you can look for if kids are having challenges, and we have a parent's guide so parents can understand at home, when does this start becoming anxiety or anxiety? When does this start becoming depression or a more serious mental illness? Because we know if we can get youth into treatment early and into support systems early, we can have much better outcomes. So that's the initial age range that I started with. And now, we've built programs. We have a teen program that's peer-to-peer. We have like a second grade, a fifth grade. We have a Shine Hope for All that's 8 lessons of art and kind of fun that anyone can kind of do. We have a college program. We have a program for veterans, incarcerated youth. So it's really, to me, and we're doing stuff in the workplace now as well. I mean, I would like everyone to measure their hope. It's an 8-question validated scale. It's called, My Hope Score. You can measure your hope and just see where you are. And then it's like, okay, there's my baseline. Now how much work do I have to do? And I often say the lower your score, the more you have to shine. So, the more you can work on it.
Yeah, that's terrific, making it very, very practical. You've mentioned several times that often you may be doing this work in contexts where hope is a bit difficult to find, or hopelessness has been normalized. And a lot of my work takes place in those settings too. And they are settings where scarcity, trauma, abandonment are real and can't be eliminated. We know these contexts are going to confront some very, very challenging structural, contextual, systemic disadvantages, and yet there is a way to find optimism there. I just wondered if you could maybe speak a bit to how to bring this work to, in particular, disadvantaged contexts, and also how you do that to make sure you're not trivializing or minimizing the kinds of actual structural challenges and barriers in those communities. How does that work go?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's not either or. So it's not, it's just we address individual hope and we don't deal with systems. We empower individuals with the skills and tools the best we can so that they can have impact on the system. They can find out what their strengths are. And because the reality is, if we stay in our state of hopelessness, we can't do anything. We can't create any change, have any impact. And so I really studied people that had, and on my podcast, I have episodes with people who think, how did they navigate that? How did they overcome that? I mean, one of, my first ones was someone that had been trafficked at the age of 5 by her father. She reached out to me. We have a Shine Hope story template, how we kind of help people write their stories and see what skills they use to navigate challenging things in the past. And then they can also write their Shine Hope future story. And that's all of these skills have been critically important in people that have overcome and navigated hard things. So to me, it's not either or. It's we need these skills to address systems, to create change. And for me, there was a lot I couldn't change growing up in my environment, yet I didn't have any skills to navigate it, and that made it 100 times worse. I mean, it led me down a road of very challenging situations, a suicide attempt, addictions, just a lot of struggling. Whereas I've been taught these skills, I could have navigated it in a much healthier way and used my skills at a much younger age. So we address, like, of course you're like high in hopelessness, makes complete sense. And here is how you can start, navigating it in healthier ways so that you're not ending up in the prison system or you're not ending up on the streets. Our Hope hero in Nevada, Reno, Nevada, Grant Denton, is a close friend of mine, and he was a heroin addict and homeless, and he's now doing really powerful, important work. And I've just talked to so many people with so many stories, and these shine skills are something that all of them are using. We all find our skills that work for us, but we use them to navigate them and to become a healthier version of ourselves. I believe we continue to keep people in oppressive states if we don't teach these skills. I think it's really critical. But again, it's not either or, it's both. How do we address both?
And it's so important what you're saying too, of creating that space where people who have the lived experience, who have confronted challenges, often have so many of the answers that are critical. And if we have a kind of old school model of standing outside of that and presenting the solution as external to those stories, it's unlikely to be effective. But if we can utilize the stories and the skills that people themselves have developed and know to work, it adds so much potency to the solutions. It is an element of what I was very curious to draw out in your story, which is your optimism about I'll just say selling hope. And I know you have a lot of
Yeah.
experience starting companies, kind of embedding a well-being oriented frame in the market, in a company, in a commodity, and something that others would want, right? And so I'd love to hear more about that element of your expertise around what companies can do here and how we can brand hope and well-being in appealing ways.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, first of all, it has not been easy. I've not been optimistic. Yet it's diving into my despair about it. It's diving into my anger that this isn't everywhere yesterday. It's diving into my sadness when I see these kids struggling and not getting the resources they need. It's diving into my fear of we're making this problem worse because now we're diagnosing everyone with all of these disorders and they're identified with that and they're kind of stuck in those states as opposed to empowering them with skills and tools to navigate. As you said, stories are really powerful, and the more we share the skills that are working, the better off we all are in the different populations that we're working in. So it actually, my frustration around it too. I mean, I ran a lot of it through the nonprofit initially, and I started a company and a brand around it maybe 4 years ago. My dad was a retail banker, and I was super close with my dad, and we knew Sam Walton, and my dad loved Walmart. So we'd go in every Walmart store and we'd look at products on the shelves and new products. And I was always just thinking, why are we just creating like more colors or flavors of teeth? Like, why are we doing meaningful products that have impact on people's lives that they can integrate and really has impact and change? And so I initially set out with the Mood Factory. I saw companies were putting logos in front of products. I was launching my own brand and I said, why don't we do that, but like keep it on all the time? It was called Cause Marketing. It's now kind of evolved into social impact. And that's initially how I started my work on Hope. And so when I started 15 years ago, I thought I'll create a program and it'll be done in a couple of years and I'll just keep on with my company. But I really, to me, hopelessness is like everyone, if we want to prevent suicide and we want to prevent violence and addiction, we all have to really understand what hopelessness is and how to get to hope. Like that is so critical. And so I've been trying to figure out how to do that, how to really operationalize hope. So it became, to me, it's my work now because I've created the programming around it, and I have cities where I license the programs to cities. It's cities pay millions of dollars for public health campaigns alone, right? So just messaging around public health initiatives, and so I've tried to make this so that cities can license it. They can license the actual programs, and then put a public health campaign out with evidence-based programs that actually support the public health messaging around it. So I'm like using every innovation skill I have to really operationalize hope. I'm better, launching companies than I am really running nonprofits. And I believe, hope deserves to be considered something valuable and something we respect. I don't believe it's a soft skill. I think it's the most important skill we can have because we know the research around hope. It's one of the key predictors of human flourishing. There's a new study by Carol Graham out of the Brookings Institute. She wrote a big paper on it. It's very impressive. And so, I'm working on an app right now for hope. So to really, feed these skills out so that we can practice and become familiar and learn. And then I'll create a consumer product line with products that support building hope. So, that's kind of how I'm figuring out. But to me, products have to have meaning and purpose and value. And so I don't want to do a product just to have a product. I want to have a product that then also helps drive and support the bigger goals because I work quickly. So to me, that it's taken 15 years to try to even start, really get this to a point where I can operationalize it significantly is that's too slow. And so I believe with company and resources and a brand, I can move much more quickly to have impact on the low income areas, the low resourced areas, the, low and middle income countries, all of those places that really need these skills as well. And, I think we continue to oppress people when we don't give them these skills and we continue to make the playing field really uneven.
No, it's terrific. I guess I realize as you're talking, I think one of the things that in research we often don't do well is that element of launching, which entails operationalizing, really creating something very usable, something easy to pick up, something that can travel, can transfer in many different contexts. We don't really focus on that element of this. Whereas if you're building something or you're creating a product or you're recognizing that it needs a market, those elements of the experience become very important. And I do think in all the frameworks you've described, there is something so tangible and usable, is always kind of translated into what happens on the ground. What's the thing that the person can do with this? How do I apply it? That seems to come first. It's just very helpful to complement the research and the ideas with that kind of action-oriented thinking.
Yeah, it's super important to me that we translate our knowledge into a way that consumers can understand it. So I know that gets criticized somewhat, that people that try to kind of popularize ideas, but you know, consumers they're not as analytical and the regular normal person, and so we have to teach them what we know. And that's, kind of always what I have done with the work I've done in working for big companies and big brands and then my own brand and this it's how do we teach people in a way that can kind of sit and they can reinforce it and that's what a brand does. It kind of repeats that thing. I think we're happy to pay for a Starbucks every day or Coca-Cola or a big movie or these things, but then they think hope, oh God, we don't, but this is such a critical skill and it's necessary and it's critical to life and all of the outcomes that people want in life. And it doesn't just fly from the sky. Like you have to do the research, you have to do studies. I mean, it's not, easy. And again, I've,
Right.
committed my life and resources to this because I believe it's so important. And we have to start
Mm,
thinking of it like a soft skill and as a critical thing we all need.
mm, mm. Yeah, it isn't easy. I think, one of the risks, sometimes a risk that uh, sometimes I think about when we have a solution that's very individual, right? That is I'm going to teach someone a skill to do something. Um, do you encounter, or how do you deal with an implication of that those that aren't hopeful have failed to pick up the skill, or that those that are in distress and don't have hope just need to do something themselves in order to get it? How can it not undermine an individual's sense of effectiveness, while kind of valorizing and teaching some of the skills that can move people toward hope?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Our hope goes up and down and changes all the time. And it's not you have hope or you don't have hope. You're somewhere on the scale and and we go down again and the more challenges and when we have traumas or when we go through major moving, job changes, divorces, or again, you live in systems. Our hopelessness is going to go up. Our moments of hopelessness are going to go up. It's going to be more challenging. And it's about just being compassionate with self and learning it's a journey. Like, I'm not all of a sudden super hopeful. Like, I work on my hope every single day, but I also know what to do to build my hope. And it's really critical. It's critical that we're kind and compassionate with ourselves as well on the journey. We're going to be all over the place, but the goal is to know what we can do to, even just like a tiny step in the direction of hope can be helpful.
Mm, terrific. Terrific. I want to leave some time for us for audience questions, but Kathryn, are there any issues you want to be sure we touch on first? Any issues we haven't talked about yet you think are really important?
Um, I think you've done a great job of covering, such a broad range of like what the work has been for me and where we're going. We got an International Day of Hope established at the United Nations, so July 12th around the world, and we have a lot of, free resources we have internationaldayofhope.org, a lot of free resources there. We're building the city work. It's super important to me. And I just, I want people to know that life is hard and can be super hard and it like to hold yourself as much as possible through that and to reach out for support. And, again, you don't just get to hope. It took me a lot of learning, a lot of work, a lot of repetition, a lot of going back, and I work on it every day.
I think that's really helpful. It comes through, really shines through in the book, the hopeful state practices that are evolving, always evolving, sort of finding the strategies that help in the moment. Could be different today than it will be in a year, but always having a menu of those things that you can return to, um, is what a practice is all about, right? Practice is always evolving.
Yeah,
So I'm
absolutely.
looking,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm looking a bit at our questions from the audience. Thank you all so much for this. It is a question that I had. This is brought up in the Q&A. How are you thinking about this work right now in the current moment? We can think about the current moment of polarization, of intensification, escalation, the present moment in LA, recovery from the fires. There's so much locally, nationally, globally happening. Has the last year changed your work, your viewpoint? How are you thinking about these issues right now, today, in that context?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's still the it's still the fundamental. We've got to be managing our moments of hopelessness. The news does train us to 24/7 hopelessness. Anytime you turn on the news, if you're not triggered by a moment of hopelessness, I think you're not alive. Seeing what's happening in the streets, I just moved to Florida from Chicago, and I feel so deeply, and that's been part of my challenge. It's like I feel the despair of others really deeply, and I get stuck in my helplessness so easily, and I get into my overwhelm so quickly. And what happens is we pile those hopelessness moments up and we become hopeless about everything. And that stops us really in our tracks from having any impact. And to me, that is what oppression does. It kind of trains us to hopelessness, and then we don't do anything, or we turn to our addiction, or we turn to our self-harm, and we're not supportive and useful to anyone. So to me, it's being really intentional about our practices around hope, and how are we managing our emotional despair about the situation, and how can we get out of our helplessness and into our action. So where is our power? And that's so important. We cannot solve everything. We cannot solve every problem for every individual. And I want to, I want to solve everything, and I can't do that. Nobody can do that. We burn ourselves out. And so where is my locus of control in these moments? What am I most triggered by? What am I most angry about, sad, afraid about? And how can I get out of helplessness and into action? And how can I, do that, address that one thing? Where are my skills? What can I bring to the table? How can I have impact in that specific area? So narrowing our focus and where we have power, because doing something and taking action is super powerful. I do limit my exposure to the news, because again, that will get me down those cycles and spirals. And I think about where is my, do I need to know all of the things that are happening? And again, this 24/7 sense of hopelessness. And so I use the news for what I need it for. Yeah, and then I connect with others in my community, and I work with others to solve problems and to have impact. Because doing some kind of positive action is super important. Again, if we don't address our despair and our helplessness about everything happening, we stay in that cycle of hopelessness. And then the other thing I'll say is, anytime leaders use fear, anger, sadness to get you to act, they're going to get you to act from that downstairs brain, which again, our thinking is in our frontal lobe. We call it the upstairs brain in our programs. If you're in your downstairs brain, you make horrible decisions. And so anyone leading with those emotions is a red flag for me, because that's just a form of trying to manipulate me to take action on something out of fear, anger, sadness. And you don't want to do that, So getting to my place of kind of calm, and then where can I have impact, is really important.
The intentionality of what you're describing seems so critical to me, both identifying where you are as a first step, recognizing the hopelessness, the spiral, remembering that is not the only place to be at this moment, understanding the skills available to you, finding a place to start, and then building on that. Very helpful. There's what I think is just an excellent question here in the chat. In your trainings, how do you connect hope with reaching out for help as an active skill? I don't think we talked about nurturing networks, but I wondered if that might be one element of this, teaching both hopeful practices, but how to reach out for help.
Absolutely. And, that's the goal, is we want people reaching out to help before they're in crisis, so that, you don't reach crisis, you're connecting with people prior. We have an anxiety and depression online support group on iFred through the nonprofit. But Nourishing Networks does teach that. It teaches how to have healthy networks with other people, bi-directional. That's why we call it Nourishing Networks. We want to be nourishing to them, and we want them to be nourishing to us. And also a healthy relationship with the self, how to practice self-forgiveness, self-love, self-compassion, all of these things, which are, it's a lot easier for me to have healthy connections with other people. And I was really hard on myself and learning how to be kind to self and forgiving and compassionate and, again, understanding that it's a journey. But it's super important. And then, we have, crisis hotlines are super important. And in our programs, we always refer out to organizations doing work in the space or ways to connect with people. We talk a lot about, the loneliness epidemic. And to me, we are hopeless about making connections with other people because people can be alone and still feel connected to things. But when you're alone and you feel despair about it and you feel helpless to do anything about it, that's a real problem. And so how do we manage our despair about not having connections? And then how can we get out of our helplessness and build skills around connections? We have a college course and that's one of the lessons. Like, how do you make friends on campus? You're alone, how do you connect with other people? What are the resources that are available on the college campus to get support if you feel unconnected? And you're not just supportive people, but if you have financial challenges or if you're experiencing housing, you're unhoused, or you have financial worries, or you have food insecurity, where are those resources? And how do I get connected to them and in the community? So it's a really important part of hope. There's a thing that you're up to 95% more likely to achieve a goal. So something you want in your future, if you write it down and then you check in with someone regularly. So it just kind of shows the importance of that connection, that support system, that person. And another thing, in our youth programming, we know that a big indicator of youth outcomes in life is one trusted adult in their life. And so we have the kids, fill out who's in their nourishing network. Do they have at least one trusted adult? And if they don't, we encourage the teacher to be that for that child. It's, some classrooms, 50% of the kids don't have one trusted adult in their life. And it's like, that's shocking, So yeah, nourishing networks are super important.
Yeah, so important. On this, I feel like there's a great question that really touches on this too about social media, and I'm curious how you address that in your interventions, maybe especially with young women, where we recognize there may be some disproportionate negative mental health outcomes. How do you address this? What do you see as the role for social media? What are some things parents and others, teachers can do around social media to make sure that they're supporting hope?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great blocker of hope, so, and again, it depends on how we use it. We have a teen program and we have a chapter on social media in our teen program. Now, our teens were clear with us that they wanted a peer-to-peer program on hope. So it wasn't delivering instructor, it's workbooks, it's a big, 12 lesson curriculum around hope. And again, we have a chapter on social media and they said clearly, do not tell us to use social media, to not use social media. And so how we approached it and we worked with teens to develop this is, we asked them to do some research on social media, just, what are the positive benefits of social media and what are the negatives? And we have them do this work and we give a couple of resources, but we're very kind of influencing either way. It was super important. And then, we encourage them to track their use of social media and how they feel, their feeling state. How does that affect their emotional state and, their sense of power or powerlessness, and to kind of look at that and track that over time and to become curious about it, not to look at it as good or bad, but to really explore it for themselves. Because, as a teen, like I didn't like being talked to or told, I wanted to learn and explore for myself. And that's the group of teens we got together to develop this, had that same experience. So I think it's important we look at, when you look at the emotional despair of helplessness, we have to start understanding what's driving that emotional despair And it, may be social media for individuals, or that might be a place where they're getting connected to others and making friends. And so it's a really individual basis.
And imagine for teachers and parents, that's a great area for curiosity. You'd want to understand that from a teen. What is it that social media, in what ways is it positive, helps you feel more excited about what's coming up? In what ways isn't it? And where are there options to shift that balance a little bit? I think parents could be curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, I do see some questions, and Kathryn, you might want to speak to things like how could we volunteer to help? How do we bring this into our own schools? What can we do for even younger kids? How can we make this more available and learn more about the skills?
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, the International Day of Hope is a great place to start. I would love to bring hope to LA, to make LA a hopeful city. We launched Chicago, Reno, Las Vegas. We license our programs out to nonprofits, or to, philanthropists can sponsor a city, or to city. We're about to launch Napa, California, and it's going to be our first hopeful county in the state of California, or really anywhere. So we're really excited about that. And then we got to get the word out. This hopelessness is a normal experience. We have to stop pathologizing hopelessness. It's something everyone experiences, and it's just learning about what it is. And like, we're unconsciously either managing it in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. And we want everyone to know how to manage it in healthy ways. That's kind of the goal. So yes, definitely. I mean, reach out to me. I also encourage you, myhopescore.com. You can measure your hope, so at least understand how science is thinking about hope. And, if nothing else, it's challenging to be hopeful in challenging times. And it's like, that's when we have to buckle down moment by moment and do the things that help us. And, as we talked about, everyone is different on their skills. So with Shine, we give a ton of examples of the skills, but everyone's going to be different and kind of build their own, kind of framework for and everyone should build their own kind of way for building hope in their own lives.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
I want to thank you both, Kathryn and Beth. This was really an enlightening and very informative conversation, and something I think we all needed. Thank you for guiding us on how we can intentionally bring hope into our lives and manage emotional distress in healthy ways, how we can navigate our stress responses. This is just, you gave us so many tools to unpack and use in our daily lives. So thank you very, very much, both of you. And Beth, thank you for doing such a fabulous job moderating this conversation.
Pleasure.
Kathryn, thank you for the gift of your book,
Yes.
writing it to help all of us integrate hope in our lives, because it's something that, these are challenging times, and this is such important work. So thank you. Thank you to everybody who tuned in, for the privilege of your time. As Kathryn mentioned, our next program is on fawning with Dr. Ingrid Clayton. So I hope you'll all tune in. It's on Wednesday, January 28th, 5 p.m. Pacific time. And she will be in conversation with Dr. Nicole Presley, who's the head of the UCLA Counseling and Psychological Services. So on that note, I wish you a very hopeful evening, a very hopeful week and year. So thank you all so much. Good night.
Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathryn, for your work.
Mhm.
Bye.